Life is not always fair. Sometimes, the innocent pay the price for crimes they never committed. Sometimes, justice is nothing more than an illusion, a system built on power, influence, and deception. This is the story of a man who fell victim to that system. A man whose life was stolen, whose dreams were shattered, and whose name was dragged through the mud. This is the story of William McIntyre. Welcome to this channel, where we bring you true stories of struggle, survival, and the fight for justice. Stories that shake the very foundation of what we believe to be right and wrong. Stories that make us question everything we thought we knew. William McIntyre was an ordinary man, hard-working, ambitious, and full of dreams. He had built a stable life for himself, a good job, a comfortable home, and friends who stood by him. He had everything a man could want, but all of that was about to change in an instant. It was a quiet evening. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streets were bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. William sat at his desk, finishing up some paperwork from work. A cup of coffee rested beside him, steam curling into the air. His phone buzzed, a message from a friend inviting him out for a drink. He smiled, replying with a simple, "Maybe next time." Outside his window, the world carried on as usual. Cars moved along the road. Laughter echoed from a nearby cafe, and a couple strolled hand in hand on the sidewalk. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But somewhere in the shadows, something was lurking, a silent force waiting to destroy him. William stood up, stretching his arms, feeling a strange heaviness in his chest. It was a feeling he couldn't quite place, an unease, as if something was about to happen. He shook it off, convincing himself that he was just tired. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, like a whisper in the back of his mind. Then, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw something, someone, just beyond the glass of his window. A shadow moving quickly, disappearing into the night. His heart skipped a beat. He stepped closer, peering outside, but there was nothing there. The street was empty, the world unchanged. Just his imagination, he told himself. Little did he know, this would be his last peaceful night. The life he had built, the name he had made for himself, and the freedom he took for granted. Everything was about to be ripped away from him. Because justice doesn't always protect the innocent. Sometimes it devours them. A loud, urgent knock shattered the silence of the night. William McIntyre frowned, looking up from his laptop. It was almost midnight, too late for visitors. He hesitated for a moment before walking towards the door. Another knock. This time, it was louder, more forceful. His pulse quickened. Something didn't feel right. He unlocked the door and pulled it open, only to be met with blinding flashlight beams and the stern faces of uniformed officers. William McIntyre? The lead officer's voice was firm, cold. William blinked, disoriented. "Yes? Can I help you?" The officer didn't hesitate. "William McIntyre, you are under arrest for the rape of Jane Turner." The words slammed into him like a sledgehammer. His body tensed. His mind scrambled to process what had just been said. "What?" he stammered. This has to be a mistake." But the officers had already moved in. One grabbed his arm, yanking it behind his back, the cold bite of steel against his wrist as the handcuffs snapped shut. "Wait! No! I don't even know what you're talking about." William struggled, but the officers were unyielding. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." His mother, awakened by the commotion, appeared in the hallway, her face pale with terror. "William, what's happening?" "Mom, I didn't do anything," he yelled, his voice raw with desperation. The police dragged him towards the door. Flashing red and blue lights painted the night sky. Neighbors peeked from their windows. The press had already gathered, cameras clicking, reporters shouting questions. "William McIntyre, did you do it? Do you deny the allegations? What do you have to say about the victim's statement?" His mind spun. How had this happened? Why was no one listening? The officers shoved him into the back of the police car. The door slammed shut. His mother's cries faded as the car pulled away, taking him towards a nightmare he never saw coming. The interrogation room was small, cold, suffocating. A single flickering light buzzed overhead. William sat at the metal table, wrists still cuffed. His throat was dry, his heart pounding. Detective Rossi entered, tossing a file onto the table. "You should make this easy for yourself, William." William exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "I don't even know what this is about." The detective smirked, opening the file. "You know exactly what this is about. Jane Turner, the woman you assaulted." "I don't even know a Jane Turner." William snapped. Rossi leaned forward. "She remembers you." "She's lying." The detective's smirk didn't fade. He slid a set of pictures across the table. Grainy surveillance images from a bar, showing William with a woman. "You were with her that night. You bought her drinks. You left together. Ring any bells?" William's stomach twisted. He did remember her. A woman he had spoken to briefly at the bar. They had laughed, talked for a while. That was it. "I didn't hurt her," he said firmly. Rossi sighed, shaking his head. "We found traces of morphine in her system. She was drugged." William's hands clenched into fists. "That wasn't me." "But she says it was." Silence. William's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced. He was trapped. No matter what he said, they wouldn't believe him. "Let's make a deal," Rossi continued. "You confess now, and maybe we can get you a reduced sentence. But if this goes to trial, you're looking at 20 years minimum." William's jaw tightened. "I'm not confessing to something I didn't do." Rossi sighed, closing the file. "Then we'll see you in court." The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed. The entire world was watching. William sat next to his lawyer, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His fate rested in the hands of 12 strangers. The prosecution presented its case first. Jane Turner was a promising young woman. The prosecutor began. She was drugged. She was assaulted. And she remembers exactly who did it. Jane took the stand, her eyes filled with fake tears. "It was him," she whispered, pointing directly at William. "I trusted him. And he hurt me." William's heart pounded. He wanted to scream, to fight back. But his lawyer had warned him, "Stay calm, let the facts speak." Except the facts didn't seem to matter. The jury watched Jane with sympathy. His lawyer stood. "Miss Turner, did you take any medication that night?" She hesitated. "Just a few painkillers." "Which contained morphine, correct?" She shifted in her seat. I don't remember, but you're sure you remember my client assaulting you?" "Yes," she cried. The prosecutor smirked. The damage was done. William's lawyer fought. He argued. He presented the inconsistencies. But the jury had already made up their minds. The judge cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" A pause. "Guilty, Your Honor." William's world crumbled. His mother screamed. His lawyer's face fell. The prosecutor smirked in triumph. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. "William McIntyre, this court finds you guilty. You are sentenced to 6 years in prison." The gavel struck. The chains tightened around his wrists. His life was over. The heavy metal doors slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed through the long, dimly lit hallway. William McIntyre stood there, wrists bound in cold steel, his breath shallow, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. A guard nudged him forward. "Welcome to your new home, McIntyre." The prison loomed around him like a beast. High concrete walls lined with barbed wire, watchtowers with armed guards scanning every movement, and a sea of orange jumpsuits. Men who had been swallowed by the system, just like him. The scent of sweat, dampness, and something more sinister hung in the air. Echoes of shouting, clanging metal, and distant laughter filled the space, a twisted symphony of imprisonment. As he walked down the corridor, inmates pressed against the bars of their cells, sizing him up, "Fresh meat," one of them sneered. "How long you in for, pretty boy?" another chuckled. "He don't look like he's gonna last." William clenched his jaw, refusing to acknowledge them. Every step forward felt like a step deeper into hell. The guards led him into a small room. "Strip," one of them barked. He hesitated. "What?" "You heard me. Clothes off. Now." Shame burned through him, but he complied. They searched him thoroughly before tossing him an orange jumpsuit. "Welcome to Ironwood Penitentiary." The guard smirked as he handed him a rolled-up blanket. "You're in Block C. Hope you make it through the night." William was led through another steel door and into the main prison block. Rows of cells stacked on top of each other like a concrete hive. Some prisoners leaned against the bars, their eyes sharp, predatory. "Yo, what you in for?" one of them called out. "Bet it's something nasty," another laughed. He ignored them. He had to. He couldn't show fear. Finally, the guard stopped at a cell. "This is you." The door slid open with a metallic screech, and William stepped inside. A tiny cot, a metal toilet, a sink. Nothing else. The door slammed shut. He sat down, hands on his head, trying to process everything. Just days ago, he was free. Now, he was here, locked in, surrounded by criminals, branded guilty for something he never did. He leaned back against the cold wall, exhaling shakily. Outside, the noise never stopped. Men shouting, laughing, fighting. He was trapped in a world that wasn't his. His first night was long. Every sound jolted him awake. At some point, someone screamed from another cell. There was laughter. A fight broke out somewhere in the distance. He closed his eyes, but sleep never came. Morning arrived with a loud buzzer, and before he even had time to gather his thoughts, his cell door creaked open. "Out!" a guard barked. He stepped into the yard, a wide, open space enclosed by towering walls topped with barbed wire. Groups of inmates gathered in clusters, each one sticking to their own. The hierarchy was clear. The strong ruled, the weak suffered. A tall, muscular inmate approached him, smirking. "First day, huh?" William tensed. "Yeah. Name's Butch. You stick with the wrong people in here. You don't last long." His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, a warning. William swallowed. "Who should I avoid?" Butch chuckled. "Almost everyone." Before he could say more, another voice interrupted. "Hey, newbie!" William turned. A different inmate, shorter but stockier, stood with his arms crossed. "I hear you're in for rape." William's blood ran cold. "That true?" "It's a lie," William said quickly. The inmate smirked. "They all say that." The next thing he knew, a fist slammed into his gut. He doubled over, gasping for breath. Laughter erupted around him. "You better watch your back, pretty boy," the inmate warned before walking away. William straightened, wiping his mouth, feeling the sting of humiliation. This was just the beginning. Days passed, but they felt like years. William kept his head down, avoided trouble, but trouble always found him. He ate in silence. He worked in silence. He survived in silence. But at night, when he was alone in his cell, the questions haunted him. Could he ever prove his innocence? Would anyone believe him? Or was he already a dead man walking? The cold steel of the handcuffs dug into William's wrists as he stepped out of the transport van. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, urine, and something even darker, something that reeked of violence and despair. Towering concrete walls stretched endlessly in every direction, lined with razor-sharp barbed wire that glistened under the dull gray sky. Armed guards stood watch from high perches, their eyes scanning the yard below like hawks, ready to swoop down at the first sign of trouble. "Move it," a guard barked, shoving William forward. He stumbled slightly but kept walking. Around him, inmates pressed against the fences, their hungry eyes sizing him up like a fresh piece of meat dropped into a lion's den. "Yo, fresh fish," one of them hollered, grinning through a gap in his teeth. "He's too pretty to last a week in here," another jeered. "I give him 3 days before someone breaks him," a voice chuckled from the shadows. William ignored them, his pulse pounding in his ears. Every step felt heavier, as if the weight of his fate was finally sinking in. He wasn't in the real world anymore. He was in their world now, a world of predators and prey. And he had no idea which one he was yet. The large metal doors screeched open, and he was led inside. The intake area was a suffocating space of flickering fluorescent lights and the dull murmur of guards processing new inmates. One by one, the newly arrived prisoners were stripped of whatever dignity they had left. "Clothes off," a guard ordered. William hesitated, swallowing hard. He had been stripped of his freedom, his reputation, his life. Now even his clothing? But he knew better than to argue. Slowly, he peeled off his shirt, then his pants, standing exposed under the cold, unforgiving light. The guard barely looked at him as he handed him an orange jumpsuit. "Put it on. You belong to the state now." First night in prison, his cell was a cold, lifeless box of concrete and steel. A thin mattress lay on a metal frame, with a single dirty pillow. The sink dripped slowly, the sound echoing through the small space like a relentless reminder of his isolation. A toilet sat in the corner, rusted and stained with no seat. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, locking him in. The sound rang in his ears like a final judgment. Outside, the prison was alive. Shouts echoed from the corridors, angry voices, desperate screams, bursts of laughter that carried an edge of madness. Somewhere, deep within the cell block, a fight was breaking out. A dull thud followed by a sickening crunch. Then silence. William sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, trying to process everything. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. 1 day ago, he was a free man, living his life, minding his own business. And now he was here, in this place, a prison for the worst of the worst. His heart pounded. His mind raced. How had this happened? How had his life collapsed in the blink of an eye? He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. He had to stay calm. He had to think. There had to be a way out of this. But for now, all he could do was survive the night. He lay down, closing his eyes, but sleep never came. The noises outside never stopped. Men laughing, cursing, plotting. The sound of boots marching down the corridor. The clanging of metal doors. And then, suddenly, a blood-curdling scream. William's eyes snapped open, his body tensed. The scream faded, replaced by laughter. He lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, his breath shallow. This was his new reality, and it was only just beginning. Meeting the inmates. The next morning, the cell doors groaned open. "Out!" a guard barked. "Yard time!" William hesitated before stepping out into the blinding sunlight. The prison yard was a battlefield. Groups of inmates stood in tight circles, each claiming their own territory. The air was thick with tension, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. He moved cautiously, avoiding eye contact, not sure where he belonged, if he belonged anywhere at all. "First day, huh?" He turned, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and tired eyes leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I'm George," the man said. "You?" "William," he replied hesitantly. "Let me give you some advice, William. Don't trust anyone. Not me, not the guards, not even the guy who shares your cell. In here, friendships get you killed." Before William could respond, another voice cut through. "Yo, new guy." A stocky, tattooed man approached, his eyes sharp. "You in for rape?" William's blood ran cold. "'Cause that's what I heard," the man continued. "And if that's true, you're already a dead man." "I didn't do it," William said firmly. The man smirked. "They all say that." Without warning, a fist slammed into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air. Laughter erupted around him. "Welcome to Ironwood, pretty boy," the man sneered before walking away. William straightened, wincing, his stomach throbbing. George sighed beside him. "Told you. Don't trust anyone." The realization. That night, William sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the wall. The pain in his ribs was nothing compared to the fear sinking into his bones. This was his life now. He was surrounded by men who had done terrible things. Killers, thieves, psychopaths, and they all thought he was just like them. He thought of his mother. He thought of his old life, his freedom. Would he ever see the outside world again? Would anyone ever believe he was innocent? Or was he just another name on a long list of men who were swallowed by the system? His fists clenched. He had to survive. He had to find a way out, no matter what it took. A sliver of light cut through the darkness. Hope, fragile and flickering. For weeks, William had lived in the suffocating embrace of Ironwood Penitentiary, trapped in a nightmare where justice was nothing but a mirage. But now, a new name had entered his world. A name that carried the promise of salvation. Julie Nile. He sat across from her in the cramped visiting room, separated by a thick pane of glass. The telephone receiver in his hand felt heavier than the shackles around his wrists. "I don't take cases like these," Julie said, her voice sharp, calculated. "But something about yours doesn't add up." William swallowed hard. "That makes two of us." She glanced at the thick file in front of her. "You were convicted on Jane Turner's testimony, a toxicology report that claims she was drugged, and grainy surveillance footage that shows you together at a bar." "I never drugged her," William said, his voice steady. "I never hurt her." Julie leaned in slightly. "If that's true, then someone went through a lot of trouble to frame you." William clenched his fists. "Can you prove it?" Her lips curled into a slight smirk. "Watch me. The investigation begins." Julie wasted no time. She combed through the trial transcripts, scrutinized every piece of evidence, and dissected every statement. Something wasn't right. The DNA report, the one that had supposedly confirmed William's involvement, was missing from the official records. Vanished. The witness statements. 3 individuals who had testified against William had inconsistencies, their stories shifting under scrutiny. And then there was Jane Turner herself. Julie tracked her down, watching from a distance as she laughed with friends outside a cafe. She didn't look like a woman haunted by trauma. She looked untouched by it. Julie made a call. "Dr. Florence, you oversaw Jane Turner's toxicology report, correct?" A pause. "I did," the doctor replied. Julie's voice sharpened. "Tell me, doctor, how likely is it that someone was drugged with morphine, yet showed no symptoms for over 10 hours? Another pause. "It's unlikely," the doctor admitted. "In fact, it's almost impossible." Julie's pulse quickened. "Then why did your report say otherwise?" A heavy silence settled between them. Then, a quiet confession. "Because I was told to." Julie's grip on the phone tightened. The case was rigged. Danger in prison. Back in Ironwood, William sensed the shift before it happened. The way certain inmates looked at him. The whispers that slithered through the corridors. "You got a lawyer now?" Butch asked one evening in the yard. William nodded. Butch exhaled slowly. "Be careful." William frowned. "Why?" "Because someone doesn't want you walking out of here." That night, he woke to the sound of footsteps, too quiet, too deliberate. Before he could react, a rough hand clamped over his mouth, another gripping his throat. "Time's up, McIntyre," a voice hissed. Pain exploded in his ribs as a knee slammed into his side. The cell was dark, but he could see the gleam of something sharp in the man's hand. Survival instincts kicked in. William twisted, throwing his attacker off balance. A struggle, a crash, a yell from the hallway. The guards arrived just as William landed a punch that sent the man sprawling. As the attacker was dragged away, he sneered. "You don't get to leave, McIntyre." William wiped blood from his lip, chest heaving. He knew what that meant. Someone wanted him dead before the truth could come out. The appeal begins. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, cameras ready to capture every moment. William sat beside Julie, his heart pounding. "This is it," she murmured. "Stay calm." The judge entered, his expression unreadable. Julie stood. "Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced that calls into question the legitimacy of my client's conviction." The prosecution scoffed. "We've heard this before. What's different now?" Julie's eyes burned with determination. "Everything." She stepped forward. "The DNA report that was crucial in convicting my client, it's missing. The toxicology report that suggested Jane Turner was drugged, it was manipulated. The witnesses who testified against William McIntyre, they changed their stories under pressure." The room buzzed with murmurs. The judge's gaze darkened. "Do you have proof of this?" Julie nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." She presented documents, phone records, statements. The prosecution's case began to unravel before their eyes. And then came the final blow. Julie turned to Jane Turner, who sat in the witness stand, shifting nervously. "Miss Turner," she said smoothly, "did William McIntyre assault you?" Jane hesitated. "Yes," she whispered. Julie smirked. "Funny, because I have footage of you telling a friend, 2 weeks before the trial, that you didn't even remember what happened that night." Jane's face drained of color. The courtroom gasped. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Turner, did you lie under oath?" Tears welled in Jane's eyes. She looked at William, then at Julie, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Yes." Silence. The prosecution's face twisted in horror. Julie turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this case proves that sometimes even the justice system gets it wrong. William McIntyre is innocent." The verdict. The judge's gavel struck once. "William McIntyre." His voice rang through the courtroom. "This court finds you not guilty. You are free to go." William's breath caught in his throat. "Free." Julie squeezed his shoulder. "Told you to watch me." His mother sobbed in the gallery. The reporters erupted with questions. William stood, his body numb, his heart racing. He turned to Jane, who sat with her head down, guilt etched into every feature. "Why?" he whispered. She looked up, her lips trembling. "I was scared," she said. "I didn't know how to take it back." William exhaled, the weight of injustice lifting, slowly, painfully. The chains were gone. The prison walls had fallen. But was he truly free? The courtroom was silent. A suffocating stillness wrapped around the walls, tightening like an invisible chain around William's chest. He could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heartbeat, slow, heavy, thunderous. His hands clenched together, fingers digging into his palms as he stared at the judge. This was it, the moment that would decide whether he walked out of this room a free man or remained shackled in the nightmare that had stolen his life. The judge exhaled deeply, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the papers before him, then lifted his gaze, his voice calm, deliberate. "William McIntyre." The judge's words hung in the air, each syllable stretching time itself. William held his breath. "This court finds you." A pause. A lifetime passed in those few seconds. "Not guilty." The words crashed over him like a wave. For a moment, he didn't react. His brain refused to process the meaning. "Not guilty. Not guilty." His mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth before she collapsed onto her knees, tears streaming down her face. William blinked, his vision blurred. His throat tightened. The chains on his wrist felt lighter now, almost weightless. A guard stepped forward, unlocking the cuffs that had bound him for too long. They clattered onto the wooden table with a sharp clang. He was free. Tears welled in his eyes, but he fought them back. Julie placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering, "It's over, William." He turned, looking at her. This woman who had believed in him when no one else did, who had fought for him bled for him, stood for him when the world turned its back. A small, tired smile formed on his lips. "Thank you." The reporters erupted. Microphones shoved forward. Questions shouted over one another. "William, how do you feel? Do you think justice was served? Will you be taking legal action against Jane Turner?" He ignored them all. Instead, he turned to the prosecution table, where Jane sat, shoulders hunched, head lowered, drowning in the weight of her own guilt. She didn't look up. Would she ever understand what she had done? Would she ever know what it meant to be locked in a cell, to be branded a monster, to have the whole world see you as something you were not? Maybe. Maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. William stepped forward. The crowd parted, cameras flashing as he walked through them. Past his lawyer, past the jury, past the faces that had once condemned him. As he reached the doors, he paused, took a deep breath, then stepped out. The outside world. The first taste of fresh air hit him like a storm. He tilted his head up, eyes closing for a moment as the warmth of the sun kissed his skin. It felt foreign, unreal, like a dream he'd once had but forgotten. His mother ran to him, sobbing as she threw her arms around him. "My boy," she cried, clinging to him as if afraid he'd disappear. "My boy, my boy." He hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of home, of comfort, of something he thought he had lost forever. But the world beyond the courthouse was not the same world he had left behind. Whispers followed him. Stares clung to him. Some people nodded in sympathy. Others looked away. But some still watched him with suspicion. Some still believed the lies. Because for many, the truth was never as exciting as a scandal. And for some, an accusation would always be a conviction. A freedom that didn't feel free. The first night back home, William sat on his porch, staring at the stars. His mother had insisted on celebrating. A home-cooked meal, laughter, warmth. But he couldn't bring himself to feel it, because something inside him had changed. He had walked out of a prison cell, but had he really escaped? Could he ever truly be free from what had been done to him? His name was cleared, but the scars remained. The nightmares, the whispers, the doubt in people's eyes, and the knowledge that while he had been exonerated, countless others remained trapped, buried alive under the weight of false accusations and broken systems. He exhaled slowly, his hands tightening into fists. He had been given a second chance. But what about the others? How many were still locked away? How many men had been torn from their families, their lives stolen, their stories never told? His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 untold injustices. How many innocent people are still in prison? The wind whispered in response, the night stretching infinitely before him. He lifted his gaze to the sky. Somewhere beyond those stars, beyond the walls of prison cells and courtrooms, beyond the corruption and the lies, maybe there was justice. Maybe there was still hope, as long as someone was willing to fight for it. Thank you for joining us on this journey, a story of injustice, resilience, and the fight for truth. William McIntyre's battle may have ended, but for countless others, the struggle continues. If the story moved you, if it made you question, if it made you feel, then don't let it end here. Share this story, raise awareness, and be a voice for those who have none. Subscribe to our channel for more real stories that need to be told, that deserve to be heard. Together, we can shine a light on the truth and stand against injustice. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, and never stop seeking the truth.